Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesday. I am your co host, Ian DeMars, along with Ryan Solomon. And Ryan, we saw a lot of crazy things happen this past week in the NFL. There were a lot of upsets, but there were also a couple of major storylines that happened in the NFL this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to start right where everything kind of left off on Sunday, and that was the firing of Mike McCarthy from the Green Bay Packers. So after 13 seasons at the helm of the Green Bay Packers, Mike McCarthy was let go after the so-called embarrassing loss to the Arizona Cardinals 17-20 on Sunday. And there's been a lot of questions flurrying about whether this was really the right time to let him go. I think most people think that it was in fact time for him to go this season after the way that team's performed. But the big question here is, was it right to let him go while there's still games left to be played this season? People are saying it wasn't right that they let a Super Bowl winning coach go. They should have respected him more and held on to him until at least the season was over. I want to get your take on this, Ian, because I can see both sides of this perspective.
Yeah, looking at it, just looking at the way the teams played this year and kind of off of last year, too, you kind of tell that it seemed like this was going to be it for Mike McCarthy. No matter what happened this year, even if for somehow they got into the playoffs, it just seemed logical that it was going to be his last season. And you look at what happened on Sunday, they actually had a lot of things happen for them that would have helped them in the playoff race. You look at Carolina loss, the Minnesota Vikings loss, the Chicago Bears loss, which would have kept them in the playoff race in their own division. They had a lot of things happen to them. The Eagles won on Monday night, so that even helped their chances a lot more, making them probably had the most likely opportunity to get a win this week at home against one of the worst teams in the NFC, a struggling young Arizona Cardinals team. And you had the advantage in the game. You're playing at home and you're playing in cold, crappy, rainy, snowy weather. And you're going against an Arizona team that's young, rebuilding, and plays in the desert. So they play in warm weather all the time. So you figure you have a huge advantage going into this game. And you look at what happened in the game. First, I'm going to start off with the play calling and rotation. Aaron Jones, we did not really see him on the field in the second half, and I can understand if he didn't necessarily have the best performance. But you look at the one time we really saw him touch the ball, he scored a touchdown. So the fact that I don't know what it is with Mike McCarthy, but it seems like we've seen this since Aaron Jones has become the main back. We'll see him get 10 to 15 touches in the first half, and then the second half, he just vanishes. And it doesn't make sense because this guy averages over 5 yards a carry. Aaron Rodgers has had a subpar year. He's only thrown one interception to, I believe it's 21 touchdowns, but his completion percentage is down. And you can just look at the way he's throwing the ball that something's up with him. And I think it has to do with that knee injury. He might be 100% now, but that definitely played into the factor. But you just look at Mike McCarthy overall, it's been downhill for him these last few years. Play calling hasn't been there. We've noticed it in many games. We've noticed it in many big games. Look at the NFC Championship game a few years ago. Not when they got blown out by the Falcons, but when they were in Seattle. They had a couple of 4th-and-1 opportunities near the goal line, and they kicked 2 field goals. They lost that game. He's been there for 13 years with one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And they've only been to one Super Bowl. Yes, they did win that, but they've been to one Super Bowl in that time frame. It's not acceptable, especially when you have that talent of a quarterback. And yeah, you can blame being a young team, being injured, a struggling defense. Those are a lot of things you can look at. But when it comes down to it, you need a coach that can work with your quarterback. And unfortunately, these last few years, that time has fizzled away with Mike McCarthy. And Sunday was the epitome of it. They had opportunities to put this game away. They didn't do that. And then not only was it the Aaron Jones factor that cost him his job on Sunday, but when they were one play away from kicking, instead of doing a short out route to help out your kicker, which had to kick in rough conditions on Sunday. You throw it in the end zone, which, I mean, Aaron Rodgers has done that before. But the way the season's gone for them, you need to kick the field goal, get that game to overtime, throw a quick out route. Yeah, there were only 8 seconds left and they didn't have any timeouts, but you have to position your kicker better. And after seeing that and seeing that missed field goal, after seeing that, I told myself he's not going to be the head coach next week. And I figured it was going to come on Monday, but it was done 2 hours later. So I think everyone knew it was going to happen. A lot of people said that the team gave up on him. But I think Mike McCarthy just didn't know how to handle this team. He's been trying to run it his way, and the fact that the NFL is starting to adapt to college offense has kind of hurt him a little bit. And because of that, that's why he was let go. It's unfortunate. He's had a great 13 years there, but it was just the right time for him to go.
Yeah, and if you look at the scores from the recent games, first of all, they've lost 5 of their last 6. Obviously, very bad. But the scoring for the offense just has not been there. We're used to seeing if the Packers lose, Aaron Rodgers still puts up numbers, he still puts up points, and the defense just lets them down. But if you look at this, the Seahawks game, they allowed 27 points, Vikings 24, Cardinals 20, and the Packers' point totals were 24, 17, 17. Like you said, that's not acceptable for a quarterback that's a future Hall of Famer, still on at least the tail end of his prime, with receivers that he should be able to get it done with. Like, these are not all-star receivers for sure, but Davante Adams is great. Valdez-Scantling has shown that he can be solid. Cobb has been solid in the past. He has weapons. Aaron Jones is a weapon. They're just not getting it done on offense, so something had to change. And you've seen the Packers sort of decline and decline and decline and decline, and we're waiting around for something to change, and it just hasn't changed, so something has to be changed, which unfortunately for McCarthy had to be him, because that's who you point to when the team hasn't been succeeding in the past number of years. Where do you think McCarthy is going to go from here, and where do you think the Packers are going to look for their head coach?
It makes sense for McCarthy. He's going to, I mean, when I say that, it seems like he's going to find a job right away when the season is done. Cleveland is an option with John Dorsey being the GM there, so has that Packer connection. There are rumors possibly that if Harbaugh were to either get fired or leave the Ravens, that he could possibly join that team. Other than that, it's kind of just going to be a guessing game on what happens at the end of the season. Dolphins aren't looking necessarily too well. They're still in the playoff hunt, but if they don't make the playoffs this year, wouldn't surprise me if they make a coaching change. The Bengals and Marvin Lewis, they are, after what seemed like a good start to the year, have continued to struggle. They are now getting some key injuries that are hurting them, but it doesn't look like he's going to be coming back. But I think he will find a job in the NFL next year as a coach. Otherwise, I think he'll find a spot somewhere in the NFL. Otherwise, looking at the Packers' next head coaching situation, so Joe Philbin is the interim head coach right now, so he's going to get the next 4 games to kind of prove himself. Doesn't necessarily have the best track record in the NFL. I believe when he was with the Dolphins, had a record of 24-28, so not the best record. But he has these 4 games to kind of prove himself against 2 division teams in the Bears and the Lions, and then the Falcons and the Jets. But for other coaches, I think Josh McDaniels makes a lot of sense in this situation. The guy who was basically about to leave New England last year, had accepted a job with the Indianapolis Colts, but then there were some question marks, and then he ended up ditching them. And the main one was the health of Andrew Luck. And we've seen Andrew Luck, seems like he's bounced back this year and has played very well. But you have a quarterback in Aaron Rodgers who's a once-in-a-generation talent. And I think that opportunity would put him in a great spot in Green Bay. Another one would possibly be either Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma. He's had a phenomenal year, and they have a fantastic offense in that team. Or you could bring in a guy who's also been speculated from the college game, and that's ex-Texas Tech coach Cliff Kingsbury. I think that could work out. He hasn't necessarily had the best college record, but sometimes not having the best record in college could surprise some teams in the NFL and produce some success. So sometimes you got to go after those unsuccessful, unknown coaches. I mean, remember when Mike McCarthy got hired? He wasn't necessarily the big name or the favorite to get the job, and he got the job and he stuck there for 13 years. So wouldn't surprise me if they go to college, but I think Josh McDaniels has this job on his radar right now. So it wouldn't surprise me if he gets the best opportunity. But for now, I think Riley and Kingsbury are going to be the ones that get like immediate looks.
That could definitely be interesting. We've heard Lincoln Riley's name tossed out there for NFL coaching positions before, and he is one of the premier candidates coming out of the NCAA. Let's move on from the Packers now and go to one of the other biggest developing stories from this week, and that's Kareem Hunt being let go by the Chiefs after an apparent domestic violence issue that was caught on tape. Actually, I don't know if it was domestic violence. It was an assault issue, though, where he was seen shoving over a woman and then kicking her once she was on the ground. There's a lot of different directions we can go with this. I guess, do you think that Kareem Hunt is going to play football again in his career?
It's kind of tough to answer that question. And the reason why I say it's tough is because, you look at the case. So, it's just this whole case right now with Kareem Hunt's a little weird. So this was an incident back in February. The NFL already knew about it. And the thing was, they weren't able to get the video from the hotel. And they didn't interview Kareem Hunt about it. And they didn't even ask the girl involved about it. And somehow TMZ, of all places, got the video. And a couple days, or not even a half day later, Kareem Hunt gets released. Then we see him explain the situation to ESPN, basically saying how it's true, he made a mistake, he lied, he's sorry for his actions. It's hard to pinpoint what's going to happen because this is the first time we've seen a star running back have this kind of issue. Look at Ray Rice. Got caught, I believe it was TMZ as well, beating his now wife in an elevator one day. And we haven't heard him since in the NFL. No one's really been going after him. There's been Greg Hardy, who I don't think we've necessarily seen the video of him getting in trouble, but there's just been the multiple accusations of domestic violence where he's been involved, where he was out of the league, then he got back into the league, then got out of the league again, and now tried getting back with some developmental football leagues, and now he's going after a UFC career. And then we bring up Reuben Foster. We'll talk about him in a second in regards to our Twitter question from last week. But Reuben Foster was arrested for domestic violence and got claimed by the Redskins. So as of right now, he's on, I think, the exempt list, so he really can't do anything until Commissioner Goodell clears him or reinstates him. Looking at Kareem Hunt, he cleared waivers, so no one picked him up. So he's a free agent right now. He's not going to play football this year. That's a fact. I'm not sure if we're going to see him play in the NFL again. If we do, it's going to be a few years. Yeah, he did come out and apologize, but the fact that he lied to an NFL organization after the organization came up to him about the incident back in February. It was a big step for him to come out and admit these things on national television. But the video itself explains the story. He's probably going to get looked at, I would say next year even, but I don't think we see him in the NFL for the next 2-3 years. Wouldn't surprise me if we don't see him again. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to see him play football again. Obviously, there's the CFL. There's the new Allegiance of American Football, and then there's the XFL. So he's going to have his opportunities to play elsewhere, whether or not they take this instance against him or not. But this is going to hurt him down the line. But I don't think we're going to see him playing over these next few years just because this is something that – it's just weird how the NFL played this out because – if the NFL conducts this and if correctly and goes with it, who knows what happens with Kareem Hunt? Who knows if he even plays this year? But it's weird how this played out with the NFL. And unfortunately, because of TMZ, it seems like TMZ is always coming out with these crazy videos that one of the stars in the leagues and might not play football again.
Yeah, TMZ and their crazy videos. This is interesting because it's very similar to the Ray Rice situation where the NFL levied a small suspension on Rice originally, and then all of a sudden once that video came out, it was like, whoa, we have to give this guy more games. And it was sort of the same thing with Kareem Hunt, where the NFL knew about this incident. I don't think the NFL really wanted to know more about this incident. But now we got to see what the whole thing was, and it looks very bad. It looks really violent, and they cannot obviously let this guy play football again this year. That being said, the NFL and United States society in general is a culture that is based upon forgiveness. And while society deems assault, especially against women, to be one of the most heinous crimes you can commit, I don't think that's going to stop him from getting a second chance in the NFL. Because if you look at a lot of the other guys that are playing in the NFL right now that have had issues, Ben Roethlisberger has been accused of 2 sexual assaults so far in his career. Michael Vick was arrested for dog fighting and got back in the NFL, got another chance. I think that Kareem Hunt is going to experience the same thing where he's going to be an outcast for a while, but eventually he's going to get picked up by a team because he's still young. He still has a lot of years left that he can play and be productive. He's not like Ray Rice in that Ray Rice was on the tail end of his career. Kareem Hunt is basically a budding superstar in the NFL. So some team is going to take a look at him, and he's going to get to play again, but not this year. And we'll have to see what happens next year. But you're going to hear about this guy again.
Yeah, it's just an unfortunate case because this guy had a huge breakout year last year and was having a great season this year for the Kansas City Chiefs. Who knows if this is going to take if it's going to be a back step for them going down towards the end of the regular season. They did get a win this past week against Oakland, but they do play the Chargers again in a couple weeks in a big-time matchup. That could be a factor going forward for that Chiefs team. But we had talked a little bit about Reuben Foster earlier, so that brings us to last week's question, which was, did the Washington Redskins, was it a good choice for them to pick up Reuben Foster after his domestic violence arrest? And on Twitter, it was unanimous. All voters voted it was not the right decision. And then on Facebook, we saw it was a 75% to 25% ratio, with Facebook favoring no as well. Do remember, Foster is also on the exempt list, so he cannot do anything with the team until he is reinstated. So were you surprised that the Redskins did pick him up, or did it kind of make sense for them to do it, knowing that he probably won't be playing for a while?
I mean, it doesn't make sense from a public relations perspective, because if you look at the PR side of it, Washington's a team that gets flack as it is for being non-politically correct, for being insensitive. So picking up a guy that's accused of domestic violence more than once does not look good for them. From a perspective of maybe if he gets it together, he can be a valuable player, I mean, that sort of fits, but you would think that Washington, knowing that they're already not in good light with public relations, would tend to not pick this kind of guy up. So I'm not as fervent as a lot of people are in saying that this was a horrible move, that this is the worst thing that they could ever do. It's ridiculous that they could possibly do this. I think that it makes some sense for them. I think that you have to look at it as a business more so than a morality thing here. Like, Washington is trying to win games. They're not trying to be a moral compass for all of society.
Yeah, and you look at it, I was really surprised by the move, and I wasn't really surprised at the fact that they picked him up. But if you look at their roster in general over these last few years, Washington's been not only getting a lot of defensive players in the draft, but they've been getting a lot of defensive players from Alabama. They traded and got one recently in HaHa Clinton Dix. So they're stacking up on a lot of defensive players from Alabama. That's because we've seen Alabama play great defense in college. So it's their opportunity to develop these guys to the NFL. We're not really sure what's going to happen with Reuben Foster. Could be looks like he's not going to be playing football the rest of this year, and could be in a similar case to Kareem Hunt and how long he might be out for. But the Redskins are giving him a second chance. It's just a matter of when Goodell's giving him a second chance.
Yeah, that's true. And like I said, the NFL is all about giving second chances. It's kind of sad to me that some offenses people deem worthy of second chances and some don't. Like, if it's a guy that has a ton of drug charges or even like firearm possession who gets back in the NFL, it's all of a sudden a great thing that he's found a way to get back in the NFL. But if somebody's trying to recover from having domestic violence issues, like it's hard to believe those people actually change, which is sad because that would be the goal for somebody who has that sort of issue in their history, is to get better and not have to deal with that anymore and to succeed and become healthy. So I think that you can't just look at players for the less violent crimes and say it's great, but not pay any attention to the fact that everybody here is trying to get in a better place when you look at it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. It does seem, in some cases, the NFL does give out a lot more second chances. But with some of these cases that we've seen recently, it's going to be tough to see some of these players get these opportunities. But both these players are young, so it does look like they will at some point get some sort of chance. Just a matter of how long and what team is going to be willing to give them the opportunity.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But we'll move on to some other news in the NFL, and we'll eventually get into some college football talk, which will be exciting. But AJ Green, upon initially being injured, has re-injured himself, and Greg Olsen has re-injured his foot again as well. Ian, can you tell us a little bit more about these injuries and what it means for their respective teams?
So I believe AJ Green had a toe injury that he'd been out for the last few weeks. He had an opportunity to come back, and he had a big matchup this past week, going against Chris Harris Jr. and the Denver Broncos, who have been playing really well. And unfortunately, he did re-injure that toe this past week. And from reports that I've seen, it looks like he's going to be expected to miss not only the rest of the season, but he's expected to miss like the next 3 to 4 months of activity. So that's unfortunate for him. He's one of the best receivers in the NFL, and you figured with him getting healthy that even with no Andy Dalton the rest of the year, this team had a chance to maybe slip into the playoffs. But it's not looking like that anymore. Losing to Denver, falling another game back in the playoff chase. They're only 2 games out, so it's still a chance, but those chances decrease with only 4 games left. And then Greg Olsen, we've known he's kind of had an injury-prone career over these last few years, and it's been due to a foot injury. And it seems like every time he gets healthy, some sort of freak incident happens with his foot. And unfortunately, this happened again this past week in a loss on the road to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, injuring that foot again. Not looking good for a Carolina team that has now lost 4 games in a row. It just seems like things are getting worse and worse for that team. They do have a nice young tight end in Ian Thomas who could help them out, but Greg Olsen's been a huge piece of that team since going to Carolina. It's going to be tough to get him going again, or to get that team going. They do have 2 games still against the New Orleans Saints, so those will be tough games without Greg Olsen. And then also injury that happened on Monday night, Colt McCoy fractured I believe it was his fibia or his tibia, so he's going to be out now for the remainder of the year, which means that the Washington Redskins are going to the Sanchez and Mark Sanchez for the remainder of the year. So these are all key injuries to teams that are still somewhat in the playoff picture. If I had to say one that's going to hurt the most, it would definitely be the Carolina Panthers, because as of last week, they were in the playoff picture, but they had since fallen out with their loss. And I think they have the best chance of the 3 teams to get in. So that's why the Olsen injury is definitely the big.
Yeah, they looked like they were in great position just like 5 weeks ago to make the playoffs and maybe even try to challenge the Saints for that divisional title. And now they have just fallen way off. And it's really sad that Colt McCoy got injured because this was finally his chance to get back in and be a starter in the NFL. And to have a broken leg after Alex Smith already broke his leg, that is just bad luck for the Redskins. And it's bad luck for Colt McCoy. So that's sad as well. AJ Green, the Bengals aren't going anywhere this year, so might as well just rest him up for now, I suppose. But let's talk about something a little more exciting than injury news. So there were two teams that had big wins this past weekend, and those teams were the Cowboys, who defeated the Saints, and the Chargers, who found a way to come back and beat the Steelers in Pittsburgh. Of these two teams, which one do you think had the better win?
Looking at it, I would say the Chargers had the better one. They finally got their first primetime game in 4 years. It's been 2014. So back when they were in San Diego was the last time they had a huge primetime game. And they came up when they needed to. They were down big, and they were down at the beginning of the game 13-0. They got a big touchdown to respond. It was off of a no call false start that left a wide open Benjamin in the end zone. They fought back in the second half. They were down 16 points, got 2 touchdowns and 2 2-point conversions. And then Desmond King with a huge punt return, and I'll talk about that later on towards the end of the show. But had a huge punt return that sparked that team, gave them the lead. And then one of the craziest endings I've ever seen, where we saw 3 offsides penalties on a field goal attempt. The first one led to a missed field goal. The second one led to a blocked field goal. And then the third one, 10 yards closer, finally went through. But that's a huge win for them. They needed to get a win like this in prime time. They're playing like one of the best teams in the AFC right now. They got the Kansas City Chiefs in a couple of weeks. That's a road game. So that's another big road game. I believe it's a Thursday night game. That's two in a couple of weeks. So if they can win that game in a couple of weeks, watch out. But this team could suddenly take over the AFC. I think they're a dark horse to get to the AFC title game. And the way Philip Rivers and that defense are playing right now, they're very scary.
Let's remember, too, that they did this without Melvin Gordon, who plays a big role, too. They had, way under 50 rushing yards at the end of the first half, and they really turned it around. So it was definitely a good win for them. The Steelers looked like they fell asleep in the second half. They looked like they thought they had it already, and a bunch of really freak sort of plays happened. Like, there was a ball that Philip Rivers threw that definitely should have been intercepted in the end zone by the Steelers, but 2 Steelers actually collided with each other, and Keenan Allen ended up collecting the loose ball, so that went their way. There was that false start penalty you mentioned that went their way. There was the fact that the Steelers were offsides when Bagley missed that kick, which went their way. So there was certainly some luck involved here, but the Chargers did enough to win the game, so it was good for them. However, I would say that the bigger win came from the Dallas Cowboys simply because their position in the playoffs right now is less certain than the Chargers are. The Chargers are clearly ahead in that wild card race, whereas Dallas is now taking more of a commanding lead for their divisional race. But beating the Saints, a team that the only other team that beat them was the Buccaneers in week 1, and the team that beat the Rams, talking about the Saints, that's a big win for Dallas. And they kept New Orleans to only 10 points. So, I mean, Dallas had quite the performance on defense, and that is a signature win on this season for a team that looked like they were dead in the water no more than 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, it was a very impressive win. They fed Ezekiel Elliott the ball in that game. He had 23 carries, I believe. Also did a very good job catching the ball out of the backfield. They almost gave that game away a few different times, but they were able to play phenomenal defense and contain Drew Brees, shut down Michael Thomas, and then Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram. So that definitely was a big game. But it was kind of hard to pick out of one of these. But I think just the fact that because the Chargers never get primetime games anymore, that they got a huge one in their first one in 4 years made it a little bit bigger. But, yeah, that Dallas one was definitely a big one as well.
I like that it was Chargers-Steelers. That's a game that I remember as being sort of a classic back when the Steelers had Troy Polamalu used to see Phillip Rivers facing off against the Steelers usually once a year, and then usually the Colts once a year. So it used to be them being on primetime more often, and the Patriots too. So Chargers used to be in that primetime rotation a lot, so it was nice to see them back, and hopefully we see them more.
Yeah, hopefully we do see them more. Like I said, that they do have a big Thursday night game in a couple weeks against the Chiefs, so that definitely could be one that gets them going again. But let's talk about another team, and this team I would probably say might be the hottest team in the NFL right now. And we've talked about this team on the show a few times. The Houston Texans won their 9th game in a row this week at home against the Cleveland Browns. So after winning their 9th game in a row and continuing to take command of the AFC South, Ryan, are you finally saying that the Houston Texans are for real?
Absolutely not. I am not saying that the Houston Texans are for real. I still maintain that the teams that they've beaten in this run to their 9th straight victory have all been terrible. I mean, among these teams, the Bills, the Colts before Andrew Luck found his form, the Cowboys when they were struggling, the Jaguars, the Dolphins, the Broncos, the Redskins, the Titans, and the Browns, none of those are signature wins whatsoever. And coming up, it doesn't get any harder for them. So they're playing the Colts again, the Jets, the Eagles, and the Jaguars. They could finish this thing with 4 wins. They could end up with the 2 seed, or dare I say even the 1 seed in the AFC, just because their schedule has been so ridiculously easy.
Okay, and you do make a good point that their schedule has been easier, or one of the easiest ones in the league. But look at some of those games you mentioned. They won in Denver against now a Denver team that is in the playoff picture. They won again on the road against a Redskins team, which at the point was leading the NFC East before the Alex Smith injury. Those are some key games right there. And the offense might be a little inconsistent at times, but that defense is playing phenomenal. And you look at that Buffalo game, Buffalo has been a surprise in some of these games this year. Josh Allen has looked pretty solid these last few weeks. So I'm not, as much as you want to downgrade that game, I'm not necessarily downgrading that game a bit. Remember, they did beat the Vikings earlier this year on the road, so they can play well on the road against some of these teams. They almost pulled out a victory this past week as well, if it wasn't for a drop touchdown in the end zone by Charles Clay. So, yes, their schedule has been easy, but they're also playing some teams that might not have hit their stride yet, but suddenly are. You look at this past week against Cleveland. Cleveland's been playing solid football since letting Hugh Jackson go. And, yeah, they were able to force some turnovers, made Baker Mayfield throw the ball a lot more instead of giving it to Nick Chubb, who's had some solid weeks these past few weeks. But I think we have to look out for this team. I'm not saying that they're a top 3 team in the AFC, but I do think this team is for real. And if they can win their remaining games, that Eagles game is definitely going to be a key game. If they can play well against the Eagles, do you know if that's a home game for them or is it an away game?
That's in Philadelphia.
Okay, so if they can win in Philadelphia, then this team, I think, climbs into the top. You can debate they're a top 3 team in the AFC. But for now, I have them at the 4th best team playing right now in the AFC, behind the Chiefs, the Patriots, and the Chargers. But for now, I think they're for real, but they need to get one more signature win, and I think a win in Philadelphia would do that.
I'm going to go on record as saying that they're going to lose their first game in the playoffs this year. They're going to make the playoffs, but then the first team they play is going to beat them, no matter who it is.
And you look at the way that conference is looking. So as of right now, they would be the 3 seed. So looking at the playoff picture, they'd be playing Baltimore, who could be playing Lamar Jackson at this point. So that would be a battle of 2 tough defenses against 2 very athletic quarterbacks. So that could be an intriguing matchup to look out for. It wouldn't surprise me if we possibly see an upset.
Yeah, that definitely could be an interesting matchup. I just think that they are in for some trouble when they start playing some teams that are more difficult, because if you look at who they've played, like I said, they haven't played anybody who's that fantastic, or they caught them at the time before some of these teams heated up. and the scores have been really close still. So it's not like they're just destroying these teams. Like you talk about when, the Patriots had their run of going undefeated in the regular season, they were just destroying teams, and it was obvious that they weren't always playing the best team, but when they did beat those teams, they beat them bad. When the Texans played the Bills, it was 20-13. When they played the Broncos, it was 19-17. Redskins were 23-21, and that was with Colt McCoy in most of the game, not even Alex Smith. So I think that there's a lot of room for them to improve. I'm not going to say that they're actually good until I see them win some playoff games, because I don't think anyone on the rest of their schedule should give them trouble.
Yeah, definitely agree with you there. You said 4 games left. It looks like they are in the driver's seat to win that division. We'll see. As you said, they still have a couple games against the Colts and the Jags. So we'll see what happens. The Colts did lose a big game to the Jaguars, who started Cody Kessler this past week in a 6-0 defensive shootout. So it's looking like that
shootout.
Yeah, so it's looking like things are turning for the Texans at the right time. But let's switch topics a little bit. Let's go to college football. So it was a big week for big weekend for college football. Had the conference championship games, and then obviously the college football playoff teams were revealed. So just a recap of the championship games: we saw Oklahoma get revenge over Texas. We saw Washington win a low-scoring defensive game against Utah. Ohio State got a solid win against Northwestern. Alabama, with Jalen Hurts coming in relief for Tua Tagovailoa, came in to lead the Alabama Crimson Tide past the Georgia Bulldogs in the fourth quarter of that game. So looking at the playoff picture, the 4 teams that and also Clemson dominated in their game against Pittsburgh. But looking at the 4 teams that were picked, it was Alabama, Clemson, Notre Dame, and Oklahoma, with Georgia being the first team out at 5 and Ohio State staying at 6 despite winning their conference. Would you say that the committee got the 4 teams right?
I think the committee did get these 4 teams correct. I think if you look at these teams, they're not actually the 4 best teams in college football. I think when you look at it, Georgia's probably one of the best 4. I think Notre Dame probably should be out of that conversation, even though they didn't lose. But that's, you can't really prove that. So you have to go by what you know, and you have to use some more empirical data to back up that claim. So you have Notre Dame, who's undefeated, valid. Clemson, who's undefeated, valid. Alabama, who's undefeated, valid. And then it gets kind of muddy right there, where you have Oklahoma with 1 loss, Ohio State with 1 loss, and then you had Georgia with 2 losses, but 1 was to Alabama. So the most common argument here was that Georgia proved that they were one of the top 4 teams in the NCAA by playing Alabama close. To that, I would say that they played Alabama close, but they didn't win, which you can't necessarily say just because a team played a team close, that means they're one of the best teams in the nation. And I would say it like this: if you don't win your conference championship game, but you play in it, that's essentially an Elite 8 matchup. So Georgia playing Alabama, it was unfortunate that Georgia had to play that extra game against Bama, but it gave them a chance to play themselves in. So how can you say that you deserve to be in when you lost to one of the teams that is in the Final Four? It should be treated like a playoff game, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's definitely a very good point. I think as well they got the 4 right teams in there. And it's funny because one of my best friends is actually an Ohio State fan. So when he saw them win on Saturday, he assumed that they were going to get in because they had a bigger victory margin than obviously Oklahoma did, and with Georgia losing. So he figured they were going to get in. And then he was kind of shocked when I told him that they didn't get in. And not only that, they didn't even move up. But this is what I tried explaining to him. So I based it off of, when I was looking at the final results, I based it off of 3 things. So there were 3 factors that the committee could have looked at. They could have looked at the team that's playing the best football right now. And I think that team is Ohio State. These past few weeks, they got 2 huge wins, one against Michigan, which had the best defense in college football at the time, and then an impressive win against the Northwestern team, which has kind of been a surprise this year. Remember, they almost upset Michigan earlier in the year as well. So I think they're currently playing the best football. I think the best team out of those three, and I agree with you on that, is Georgia. Now you look at Georgia, what hurts them? Losing to Alabama definitely hurts them a little bit, although it was a very close game. And a lot of people thought that if it was a close game, that maybe you keep them in. But let's remember about 10, 12 years ago when number one Ohio State played number two Michigan at the end of the year. And they played a phenomenal game. It was a close game, and Michigan had a chance to get the ball at the end, but they couldn't do it. And a lot of people thought that that should be the national championship game. Now, remember, that was before the playoff system happened, and that did not happen. So I figured based off of that, they won't get in. But they also had a 20-point loss to LSU, who's no longer in the top 10. So that hurts them. And then you look at the team that's been the most consistent.
That's what did it for Ohio State too, is that loss to Purdue. That it was a huge blowout loss. I think that basically the committee, I think, looked at the quality of the losses. They saw LSU by 20, not in the top 10. Then they saw Purdue by a ton, not in the top 10. And then they saw Texas for Oklahoma, who they then avenged. So I think the fact that they played Texas again really helped them to sure up their case.
Yeah, and I agree with you. That loss for Ohio, their loss was definitely the worst of the three, and that definitely held them back. But you look at Oklahoma, goes to my third point, consistency. And they're the most consistent team out of those three. The offense was a dynamic threat for them this whole year. And even though the defense hasn't been that good, they can win games just with their offense. Like, they can give up 50 points on defense and still score like 56, 60 points on offense. That's how good their offense is. You look at their one loss was the Texas, but they avenged that loss with the Big 12 championship game. And they had maybe one of their best defensive performances of the year, only giving up, I believe they gave up 42 to Texas in their first matchup, and they gave up, I think it was 27 on Saturday. So that's a 2-touchdown differential in your favor. So, and I believe they scored 39 in both games. So you were able to do the same thing offensively, but your defense stepped up. That tells you that they're finally getting the defense figured out a little bit. And I think that's the reason why they can put up a threat to Alabama. But now that we know the 4 teams that are in, what's your prediction for the playoffs? Who do you think advances, and who do you think wins it all?
I really think it's going to be Alabama versus Clemson again for the third time in 4 years. I think those are the two best teams, and I think that Alabama is going to find a way to pull it out again because they were close to losing Georgia. In reality, Georgia should have found a way to win that game. They got really conservative with their play calling in the second half on offense, and they sort of just gifted that game away to Alabama. I think Clemson has beaten Alabama in the past in the championship game, and that coaching staff knows how to secure a win. But that being said, Alabama is just too tough. They have 2 quarterbacks that are basically interchangeable. You saw that when Tua was struggling, Jalen Hurts was able to come in and do just as well, if not better. So I don't think that there's much chance of any team winning other than Alabama.
Yeah, looking at it, I do agree with you as well, thinking that it's going to be Alabama against Clemson. Well, let's look at some things about Clemson. Look at the first year that they played Alabama. Alabama made some crazy offensive tweaks in their game. That's why they were able to pull that out the first year. The second year, you had a crazy dynamic Deshaun Watson, who improved and got them the winning championship. Last year, we saw a guy who had similar ability running-wise to Watson and Kelly Bryant, but had nothing to compare throwing the ball wise. And that we saw that in the national semifinal. Looking at this true freshman, Lawrence, he's got possibly a better passing dynamic than when Deshaun Watson was there. We haven't seen him do much running-wise, but this guy can get you some yards when needed. They don't need to call designated run plays for him like they did a lot with Kelly Bryant and then when they had Deshaun Watson. But this guy is dynamic throwing the ball. And I haven't seen a college quarterback throw the ball like this guy does. in quite some time. I think that's a difference maker for them. For as well as Alabama has played, they're going to get tested with that Clemson defense, but that defense of Alabama is going to get tested by this quarterback. I think that Clemson gets this win.
You think Clemson's going to win?
I think Clemson's going to beat Alabama.
That's a bold pick.
Yeah, it is bold. I've made plenty of bold picks before. Like I said, I picked Jacksonville to win the Super Bowl, and look where I'm at now.
Yeah, so I don't know if that helps your cause at all, but I'd like to see Clemson win. I think that Alabama is kind of the New York Yankees or the New England Patriots of college football, and it's good whenever anybody beats them. So I would like to see one of the other teams be able to pull that one out. But we'll go to the other conversation about college football now, which is Heisman Trophy. So there's 4 people that are basically the real contenders for this trophy, and it's Murray from Oklahoma, Haskins from Ohio State, and then Tua, of course, from Alabama. Who do you see as the top dog out of these 3?
Looking at it, I think Dwayne Haskins set a lot of records this year in the Big Ten. But we also saw, I think when you look at the Heisman, as much as you want to look at stats, you kind of have to look at team record. I think that because of that, it's either going to be Kyler Murray or Tua. But I just think Kyler Murray has just been so dynamic for that Oklahoma team. He's even played, you could say, better than Baker Mayfield did last year when he won the Heisman. I think that it's going to be a really close race between those two. Haskins definitely can make an argument as well. But I think Kyler Murray is going to be the favorite to win it, just because this guy can throw for 300 and rush for 100 in a game. It gets you 5 touchdowns. And that's something that is just scary. That's like video game-like. And like I said, he's doing it at a better rate than Baker Mayfield did at this point. So I think that Kyler Murray should be the favorite to win the Heisman.
You know, I actually agree with you 100% on this one. And I think that in my mind, at least, if I was on the selection committee for this, I would say that where your team is ending up is important. So Dwayne Haskins has been really good for Ohio State. He's been putting up huge numbers, but they're not in the Final Four. The other 2 players are. Tua's in and Kyler Murray's in. When you look at Tua, in my mind, I think it hurts him that he wasn't playing well versus Georgia, and then Jalen Hurts was able to come in and immediately outplay him. So that tells me that while Tua is very good, it's mostly the team around him that makes him look better than he probably really would be on any other team. So that leaves you with Kyler Murray, who's put up unbelievable numbers, like you said, highest scoring offense in the NCAA. He's able to run the ball. He's able to pass the ball. He's able to do it all. And he fits in both of the categories I'm looking for, which is stats, and then he's been able to elevate his team to the Final Four of the college football playoff. So in my mind, I think that Kyler Murray is the Heisman Trophy winner this year. I think the favorite, if you look at who the committee's probably going to pick, is Tua still because of how dominant Alabama's been, but I would pick Kyler Murray.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's going to be a very close race between these 3 quarterbacks. Yeah, I think if you're looking at stats, you go Murray, but if you're going off of record, then it'd be Tua. But it's going to be a toss-up just to see, because a lot of this I believe all this is done. Yeah, all this is done before I believe the semifinals even begin. So it'll be interesting to see how the voting goes out.
Yeah, that's very true, and we'll be able to see how it plays out very shortly. But let's go to our end of the show predictions for this coming week, where we're going to go. Let's start with Game of the Week. Ian, what is your Game of the Week?
So, yeah, looking at I can't believe we're only at 4 games left in the regular season. But looking at some of the games of the week, I know Thursday, if you want to see a pair of struggling teams on Thursday night, definitely tune into the Titans and the Jaguars. But no, that is not my game of the week.
You sure?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure about this. The one that I'm gonna say is the big game to watch. I'm looking at the Baltimore Ravens and Kansas City Chiefs. Now you look at Baltimore's won 3 3 games in a row now with Lamar Jackson at quarterback. So it does seem like even with Joe Flacco getting healthy, that they should stick with Lamar Jackson because of his dual threat, more running wise, but can throw the ball at some point against a Chiefs team that is still very dynamic, even though Kareem Hunt's no longer a part of that team. So I think that it's going to be a battle of can the Baltimore defense shut down Patrick Mahomes. It's an early game, so definitely get your TVs on early in the day because I think this could be a very interesting game because I think the Ravens could score with them for a half, but if the Chiefs can continue to score like they have been this year, this could get ugly in a second.
Yeah, that's a good pick for sure. I'm going with what I call the Desperation Bowl, which is the Vikings at the Seahawks, because both of these teams are right now in the playoff picture, but either one could easily slip out of it if they make a mistake, and this game is going to be huge for both of these teams. So we should see a really good one in the site where Blair Walsh infamously missed that extremely close field goal that prevented the Vikings from going on to the next round of the playoffs. So this game has some history, and it should be a good one.
Yeah, definitely a good one. And we also can't forget the game that got flexed now to Sunday night. The Los Angeles Rams and the Chicago Bears in Chicago. Mitch Trubisky looks like should be back this week, but I think that definitely could be if Trubisky's playing, I think that could be a shootout.
I don't see that being a shootout, but I see the Rams rolling in that one. I think they're going to be too much for the Bears. But let's go to our upset pick of the week. Derek, who was our guest last week, made it known that his team, the Chargers, beat the Steelers. So that brings our guest to 2-0 this year on upset picks.
Yep, he did do that. A lot was on the line for him, but he did come through. Looking at our picks, I got the big Thursday night pick right and picking the Cowboys. Ryan, unfortunately, even though Jones was back for the Falcons, they weren't able to help you out this week against the Ravens. But who do you think is on upset work this week?
Okay, so I'm going to pick a team that won a huge upset game last week, and I think that this probably won't be an upset by the time Sunday hits, but I'm going to go with the Giants over the Redskins because right now Washington's favored by 1.5 points. I think that the Giants have been playing better football than the Redskins lately, and I think they're going to pull this one out too, with Washington just being decimated by injuries at the quarterback position and other places as well.
Yeah, and I think you'll look at that big game, you could even call it a toss-up. I think the fact that Washington still has some healthy players besides quarterback, and it's in Washington, definitely does make them the favorite in that game. So I could see the Giants are coming off of a huge win this past week against the Bears, could get another big win this week as well. They still have that chance to go 8-8 and possibly sneak into the playoffs. Who knows? But I'm going to go with a team that also pulled off a big upset this past week. I'm going to go with the Arizona Cardinals at home against the Detroit Lions. Lions are currently favored by a field goal. Arizona's got their highlight win of the season. They finally beat someone not named the San Francisco 49ers. So I think they can get another big win against the Lions team that's coming off of a tough loss this past week against the Rams. I think Josh Rosen's going to get something going against that Lions defense, and I think David Johnson's going to tear up that game.
I like how now we're not picking like big upsets. We're not like picking this sub 500 team is going to beat this playoff contender. Now we're like this team with 2 wins is going to beat this team with 4 wins.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely was considering picking Cleveland at home against a struggling Carolina team. Part of me was also thinking a Vikings team desperately needing a win against the Seahawks. Definitely a couple of those were in mind. And heck, you can even say the Jets almost pulled off an upset this past week. They have another road game. They're looking for vengeance against the Bills. You can even say the Falcons could upset the Packers. I mean, the Packers did just lose this past week. So
yeah, that's definitely an option too, is the Falcons. I thought about picking them, but I feel like I've been burned one too many times now.
Yeah, and especially since I'm going to a Packers party this week, it's kind of wouldn't be a good idea if I told them to pick the Falcons. So
Yeah, you don't want to be the guy cheering against the Packers at the Packer party. Although at this point in time, is it really more beneficial for them to lose and get a higher draft pick? I think it probably is.
yeah, very true. But so since we're at the end of the show, let's go to fantasy football now. Before we do our picks of the week, Ryan, did you make the playoffs in fantasy football this year?
Okay, so in one, you're gonna find this hilarious. In one of my leagues, I ended up with the 1 seed, and I have the lowest points against out of any team. Like, it is the bottom for points against, and that's clearly the reason that I made it into the playoffs as the 1 seed, because my points for is not good. So I lucked out and went to a 10-2 season. Now I'm the 1 seed, and will probably lose in the first round of the playoffs.
Okay, and then I do have to ask, since we both are in a league together, is our league an 18 playoff?
It's a 4-team playoff.
Okay, so I did not make the
Did not make
playoffs.
the playoffs, no.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, but so yeah, looking at mine, I thought I didn't know for sure if I made it in ours. That's why I'd asked, but I actually did make it in 4 out of my 5 leagues. So I am impressed the fact that I did that. But the reason why I was really jacked on Sunday night about this was because going in, so I'm in a $40 paid league, and I had a matchup where I was going against a guy who I made a key trade with earlier in the year. This was the one where I gave away Michael Thomas. So I was expected to lose this game by, I think it was like 20 points. And luckily, I had some players play big for me this week. Ezekiel Elliott was one of them. Tyler Boyd had a solid game as well. But going into Sunday night, I had a 14.5 point lead, and he had James Conner, and I had the Chargers defense. And I was on the edge of taking the Chargers defense out. The reason why I say this is because I thought it could have been. It was a high scoring game, and that made me worry a little bit because I was thinking if it gets high enough, I could possibly lose points.
Right.
It might be a good idea to pull them. But in the fourth quarter, I was in the position where I was, I think, tied at one point, and then Desmond King saved my fantasy football season, returning a punt 70 yards for a touchdown.
That's why you're so excited about Desmond King.
Yes, Desmond King. I actually did like him coming out of college, seeing him play at Iowa. But seeing him return that touchdown got me so jacked. I was running around my apartment, super psyched, because I just realized that I got into the playoffs and could possibly win my paid league for the second year in a row. However, I am going against the best team in the league who only lost one game this year so far, and I did not beat him. So it'll be a tough matchup for me, but I do have a little bit of hope.
Yeah, that's tough. You'll have to report back to us on how that one goes. I'll let you know how my team fared in the first round. But like I said, I'm probably going to lose because that's just how it goes.
Who knows? They do say defense wins championships, so maybe you just have a pretty good defensive strategy.
Yeah,
I know
I don't think that's going to work so well. But who is your pickup for this week?
Yeah, looking at this week, it's kind of a tough matchup, but I would say that if you desperately need a running back, and a lot of them have been going down, maybe look at Justin Jackson from the Chargers. Now, we didn't see too much of him early in the game until the second half, but he was able to break off some key runs in that game, did get a touchdown, and helped them pull off the upset this past week. So I think he's definitely someone you should go after if you need a running back, at least if you're Melvin Gordon owner, or if you need a guy for at least the first round for the playoffs. Otherwise, I would even say if you need a quarterback, how about Josh Allen? This guy has the most fantasy points of quarterbacks the last 2 weeks, and he had over 130 rushing yards this past week. So he's getting more rushing yards than Lamar Jackson. So if you need someone, and he's got a good matchup against the Jets at home, you might want to go with him possibly.
Yeah, what an interesting player, Josh Allen, because we don't think of him as one of the super athletic quarterbacks, even though he gets a ton of yards of rushing. Like, he's made way more plays with his legs than he has with his arm this year. I have a guy that if you're looking for a really deep sleeper, this might be your player. Jalen Samuels from the Pittsburgh Steelers. We saw James Conner have to leave the game on Sunday night, and Jalen Samuels sort of filled in for him. He caught 3 passes for 20 yards and a touchdown. He got 2 rushes for 5 yards. So it looks like he's the guy if James Conner is injured or will be missing any time. So if you're a James Conner owner, you might want to pick him up this week just in case he doesn't play.
Yeah, definitely a good pickup there. Running backs are definitely a key to your fantasy team. I know one of the reasons why I got helped was because one of the guys I passed in my paid league accidentally left Melvin Gordon in his lineup. So that kind of helped me get into the playoffs. I think you know him, our buddy Eduardo left him in his lineup, and because of that, I get to sneak into the paid league.
Oh, Eduardo.
But yeah, so Brian, it does look like we are at the end of the show. So I'll start off by saying thanking everyone for listening to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesday, the official football podcast of Bruce Sports. Make sure you listen to us each week on either iTunes, Google Play, or Spreaker. Or if you want to listen to us when we do record live, feel free to do so on YouTube. Also give our new basketball podcast, Run It Back, a check out with Eric and Sam each week as well. Make sure to follow us on either Facebook or Twitter. If you do search us on Twitter, look for the handle at TDWN2's podcast. Keep an eye out for our question of the week coming up, and also breaking news that happens each day in the NFL. Again, thank you for listening. And then next week will be a big week as we get closer not only to the playoffs, but we also go through our week 1 of fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, so we're probably going to be belligerent, streaming a lot. But no more Packers for us to watch. So before we go, Ian, what is the team you're cheering for in the playoffs for the NFL?
Yeah, it's kind of, I haven't really thought about it too much, but I'll admit, even though you're not a fan of them, I would love to see the Houston Texans find success. I've talked about these last few years with my friends, and one of them's a huge Deshaun Watson fan, that this team's always been a quarterback away from being a Super Bowl team. They finally have the quarterback that I think can get them over the hump. And they're starting to play very well. They're starting to complete games, meaning the offense is playing just as well as defense. They can do that these next few weeks. They're going to be a scary threat.
Yeah, that's a good team to cheer for, especially with the J.J. Watt Wisconsin connection. I'm a big Rams fan now. Watching Todd Gurley and Jared Goff play, they're exciting to watch, and Sean McVay coach too. They're kind of the team that I'm pulling for this season, is the Rams.
Oh yeah, I would definitely vote for them too. I would definitely say they're a team to look out for too. And I remember when I was on my honeymoon, when Liz and I were out in California, a lot of talk was how for a while it was all people really weren't sure who to root for, but now that the Rams were playing so well, they had a team to root for. So definitely those fans are happy, but I think America's kind of happy to see the Rams playing well again.
Yeah, I think so too, except St. Louis probably isn't that pleased.
Yeah, very true, but who knows? They could possibly get an XFL franchise. We will actually know the locations of the XFL teams. I believe it's in 2 days.
Ooh, that's going to be exciting. We'll have to talk about that.
For sure.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We will catch you next week.